where life seems to slow down, where the pace is peaceful and calm. The gentle hum of daily life, punctuated by the occasional chirp of birds and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, creates an idyllic scene. But then, something happens, something that shatters the calm, a shocking act of aggression that leaves everyone stunned, confused, and questioning how something so violent could occur in a place like this. And you, the viewer, are about to be drawn into a story that will challenge your perceptions, shake your beliefs, and keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last second. This isn't just a story of random violence. No, it's much deeper, much more personal than that. In this video, we're going to tell you about a shocking event that took place one afternoon. A biker, a man hardened by the rough world of the open road, assaulted an elderly woman right in the middle of her neighborhood. At first, it seemed like just another senseless act of aggression. A young man with anger issues, a bad temper, and a complete disregard for anyone around him. But what the biker didn't know, what no one knew at the time, was that the elderly woman he had chosen to attack wasn't just any vulnerable target. She wasn't just someone you could walk over and push aside without consequence. No, this woman was someone far more connected, far more powerful than the biker could ever imagine. Her son, a Navy SEAL, a highly trained warrior, a man whose skills and experience far surpassed the biker's ability to comprehend. And the moment this biker laid his hands on the woman, he unknowingly made a life-changing mistake, one that would have consequences far beyond what he could have ever anticipated. But here's where things get complicated. This story isn't just about the biker and his actions. It's about what happens when someone pushes the wrong person too far, when they test the limits of a mother's love, when they underestimate the power of someone who spent years serving their country, sacrificing in ways most of us can't even imagine. This isn't a typical story of revenge or payback, it's something deeper, something far more profound. It's about the intersection of raw, unrelenting power and unyielding love. It's about the dangerous consequences of assuming you know everything about a person, when, in reality, you know nothing at all. I want you to think about it for a moment. Picture yourself in that situation. Imagine you're just an average person going about your day, living your life, when suddenly, out of nowhere, you find yourself in a confrontation. It's easy to think that you can handle the situation, that it's just a small issue that will blow over quickly. But what if it doesn't? What if you're up against someone who is more than capable, someone with years of training, someone who's been through hell and back and is now more than prepared to stand up for what they love? How would you handle that? Would you still feel in control? Would you still believe you're in charge? The biker, in this case, is about to find out the hard way. The truth is, he underestimated the woman he attacked. He had no idea who her son was, who she was connected to, and what kind of skills her family possessed. But that's the thing about life, it often throws us into situations where we don't have all the information, where we act without thinking, and where our actions can have consequences we can't even fathom. And the biker's story is about to show you just how devastating those consequences can be when you mess with the wrong person. But here's the real twist. This biker wasn't just any random thug. He had his own reasons for being angry, reasons that tied into his troubled past, reasons that had shaped him into the person he was. But none of that mattered when he crossed the line with the wrong woman. None of that mattered when he hurt someone who was protected by forces far stronger than he could ever understand. And now, as the story unfolds, you're going to see how this one reckless moment spirals into something far greater than anyone could have predicted. The biker, completely unaware of the identity of his victim's son, would soon come face to face with the consequences of his actions. But it wasn't going to be what he expected. He wasn't going to be just another person who got away with violence. No, this time was different. This time, the scales would be tipped in a way he could never have foreseen. And the tension between him and the woman's son would soon explode into a confrontation that would change everything. Now, I want to pause for a second and ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't know who you were dealing with? Where you made a decision without understanding the full picture? What if that decision cost you more than you could ever repay? That's what we're dealing with here, and as we move forward with this story, you're going to experience every twist and turn, every moment of tension, every shocking revelation, and the ultimate outcome of what happens when someone crosses a line they can't uncross. Before we dive deeper into the rest of the story, Let's take a moment to think about the woman in this story, the victim of this assault. She was simply going about her life, living in her quiet neighborhood, never imagining that a simple afternoon would change her life forever. How many times do we walk through our day, unaware that something unexpected could be just around the corner? Life has a way of surprising us like that, doesn't it? We can plan and prepare all we want, but sometimes, we find ourselves caught in situations we never saw coming. This woman was just an innocent bystander, and yet, her life was about to become tangled in a dangerous web of anger, violence, and retribution. But as you're about to find out, this isn't just a story of a woman who was wronged. It's the story of a mother who would stop at nothing to protect her child. And that's where things get interesting. Because while the biker may have thought he could walk away without any real consequences, he was wrong. Dead wrong. So, stick with me, because in the next part of this story, you're going to find out exactly what happened when the biker finally discovered the truth. You won't believe the chain of events that followed, the consequences of his rash actions, and the unexpected twist that sent everything spiraling into chaos. And I promise you, this is just the beginning. If you want to know how this ends, if you want to know what happens next, you're going to have to stay with me. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Are you ready? Because the next part of this story is about to blow your mind. You're not going to see it coming, and when you find out the truth, it will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, revenge, and the lengths we'll go to for those we love. Keep watching. The best part is yet to come. The story of the biker's reckless assault on the elderly woman was just the tip of the iceberg, a spark that ignited a chain of events none of them could have predicted. To understand how things escalated to this point, we need to take a step back and delve deeper into the lives of the key players involved, especially the biker. His motivations, his history, the choices he made in the days and weeks leading up to that fateful encounter, all of it plays a part in the larger puzzle, and you're about to discover how one seemingly random act of violence would soon spiral into something far darker and more complicated than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just bad luck that led the biker to cross paths with the elderly woman. No, this was more than just a moment of bad timing. This biker, a man who went by the name Maverick in the biker community, had a history. A troubled one. Growing up in a rough part of town, Maverick had never known what it was like to feel safe. His childhood was a blur of moving from one foster home to the next, a series of broken promises and fractured relationships. By the time he hit his late teens, he had already fallen into a life that seemed impossible to escape, a life filled with motorcycles, rebellion, and a thirst for adrenaline. But that wasn't all there was to Maverick. Beneath the tough exterior, the leather jackets, and the tattoos, there was a man who had spent his whole life trying to outrun his past. The first clue to understanding his actions lies in what had happened just days before the attack on the woman. Maverick had been dealing with his own set of demons, fights with his fellow club members, mounting debts, and a recent string of failed relationships. None of it was helping his temper, and all of it seemed to push him closer and closer to the edge. Then there was the matter of a small-time grudge he'd been nursing with a local businessman, a man who had recently turned down a favor Maverick had asked of him. That denial, though seemingly insignificant to others, had been a blow to Maverick's pride, and the tension between them had been building for weeks. Maverick couldn't let it go, and as the pressure mounted, it seemed as if the world was conspiring to push him toward a breaking point. That's when he encountered the elderly woman, in the middle of what seemed like a random moment of chaos, only it wasn't. At least not entirely. What made the situation even more complicated was the fact that Maverick had been under the impression that this woman was somehow connected to his most recent trouble. He'd seen her before, walking down the same street, passing by the same store he had visited several times. It was always brief, just a flash of her walking in the distance, but it stuck with him. In his mind, this woman had some connection to the man who had crossed him, the businessman who had humiliated him. Maverick, in his increasingly paranoid state, had convinced himself that she was part of the larger puzzle, a pawn in some game being played behind the scenes. And that, in his warped perception, justified his actions that afternoon. He didn't know she was the mother of a Navy SEAL. He didn't know the quiet, unassuming woman he had just assaulted was someone's mother, someone whose son had spent years in places Maverick could never imagine, doing things Maverick couldn't even fathom. But while Maverick's backstory and current state of mind paint a picture of a man whose life was unraveling in real time, the story wouldn't be complete without understanding the woman at the center of it all, the one who had become the target of Maverick's misplaced anger. Her name was Eleanor, but everyone in the neighborhood called her Miss Ellie. She had lived in the same house for over 30 years, a modest home with a small garden she took great pride in. The neighborhood loved her, and she had a reputation as someone who would go out of her way to help anyone in need, no questions asked. But Eleanor's life wasn't as simple as it appeared from the outside. While she had long since lost her husband, her son, Lucas, had become her world. Lucas was a Navy SEAL, an elite member of one of the most formidable special forces units in the world. He had always been fiercely protective of his mother, even from a young age, and it was clear that nothing would stop him from doing whatever it took to keep her safe. But the truth is, Lucas had been away on a deployment when the assault took place. And that's where the confusion started. Eleanor, while strong and independent, was still deeply affected by the absence of her son. She had learned to cope with the loneliness of having a child who was often deployed to dangerous places, but she had never grown used to it. That afternoon, after the assault, Eleanor's mind raced with fear and confusion. She had been so disoriented by the attack that she hadn't been able to recognize the true gravity of the situation. What made it even worse was that she had no idea just how much danger she was truly in. Maverick, in his frantic attempt to prove a point, had no clue about the connections he had just disrupted. But what Maverick didn't know could end up costing him far more than he bargained for. While Eleanor's son, Lucas, was far from being in the immediate vicinity, word of the attack would soon reach him, and when it did, the situation would take a drastic turn. What Maverick failed to account for was just how connected people are in this world, even in seemingly disconnected communities. Eleanor may have been a quiet, unassuming woman to most, but she was a mother, someone with a son who had been trained to handle high-pressure situations, someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer and still walked away. It was only a matter of time before Lucas found out what had happened to his mother, and when that happened, Maverick would realize the dangerous mistake he had made. But there's more to the story than just Maverick and Eleanor. As we dig deeper, we begin to uncover a shadowy network of characters, people who may not be as innocent as they appear. There's the businessman, the one who had refused to do Maverick a favor, whose connection to the biker may go far beyond a simple business transaction. Could this man have been involved in some way? Was he pulling strings from behind the scenes, manipulating Maverick into taking actions he might not have otherwise? Then there's the question of the other members of Maverick's biker gang. Some of them have their own motivations, their own secrets, and their own reasons for sticking by Maverick, even when his behavior begins to spiral out of control. And let's not forget about Eleanor's neighbors, some of whom have their own suspicious activities and hidden pasts. Could one of them have been involved in stirring up trouble, creating the perfect storm that led to the assault? As the story unfolds, we'll peel back the layers of deception, uncovering hidden truths and questionable alliances that will keep you guessing. The more we learn about these characters, the more questions arise. And with every answer, new mysteries emerge. One thing's for certain, this is only the beginning. Stay with me, because the twists, turns, and revelations are just starting to unfold. As the hours turned into days after the assault, the fallout began to ripple far beyond what anyone could have expected. Eleanor, though bruised and shaken, refused to sit quietly and let this become just another unsolved act of street violence. Her instincts told her there was more to the attack than met the eye, more than just a biker with a bad temper taking his frustration out on the wrong person. Something didn't sit right, and while most people chalked it up to a senseless encounter, Eleanor knew better. It wasn't just the way the biker had looked at her, with something in his eyes that felt calculated and familiar, but the fact that he seemed to be searching for something, maybe even someone. That was the first sign this wasn't random. But just as her suspicions started to harden into clarity, something critical vanished without explanation. There had been security footage. A neighbor 2 doors down had a Ring camera facing the street, and it had captured everything: the biker's approach, the confrontation, and the moment he sped off. It was the kind of footage that could have made the case clear, nailed his identity, maybe even tracked his license plate. But when the police came to collect the footage, it was gone. Deleted. Wiped clean. The neighbor, confused and visibly nervous, claimed they never touched it. That it had been there one night, and gone the next. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that someone had tampered with it intentionally, someone who didn't want the truth getting out. And if they could get to the footage, what else could they get to? Word of the assault had made its way to Lucas faster than Eleanor expected. One of his SEAL brothers, now working stateside in a private intelligence role, had seen a local news brief and recognized the street from a photo in the background. Within hours, Lucas was on a secure line to his mother, his voice tight with concern but calm with the kind of composed control only years in covert ops could build. When she explained what happened, Lucas asked questions not just about the man, but about timing, surroundings, and who was nearby. He wasn't thinking like a son, he was thinking like a strategist. He knew when things didn't add up, and this wasn't adding up. But even with Lucas involved, things weren't going to get easier. In fact, they were about to get much harder. As Lucas began looking into the situation from his end, strange things started happening. The first came in the form of an anonymous warning. A printed note, slipped into Eleanor's mailbox in the dead of night, with only 5 words written in uneven block letters: "Stop asking. You're in danger." There were no fingerprints, no identifying marks, no sign of who left it. It was as chilling as it was clear. But Eleanor wasn't the kind to be intimidated, and neither was her son. Lucas immediately flagged it as a threat, not just to scare her, but to buy someone time to cover something up. Lucas's inquiries led him to an old contact in law enforcement, someone he'd worked with on joint training operations in the past. This contact, a former detective named Ray Maddox, had since retired under mysterious circumstances, but still had access to certain back channels. Ray agreed to help but warned Lucas that this wasn't a clean case. He hinted that the biker, Maverick, wasn't just a rogue thug with a chip on his shoulder. He may have been working under orders. Orders from someone higher up. Someone connected. Ray didn't say who, but he looked over his shoulder the entire time they talked, and before Lucas could ask for more, Ray shut the conversation down. "You don't want to go too deep," he said. "Not with this one. You dig too far, and you won't like what you find." That cryptic warning didn't stop Lucas, it only pushed him harder. He had always trusted his gut, and right now, it was telling him that something was buried just beneath the surface. But when he tried to reach Ray again the next day, Ray was gone. His phone was disconnected, his social media profiles erased, and his small apartment cleared out. Not a trace. No one had seen him leave, no one reported him missing, and no police report had been filed. It was like he had never existed. Lucas had seen this kind of thing before, people disappearing just before they say too much. As Lucas dug deeper into Maverick's past, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. A blurry, half-buried photo from 10 years ago, taken during a military charity event outside Fort Bragg. Lucas was in the background, still fresh-faced and newly enlisted. But in the crowd, standing just behind a row of bikers gathered for the event, was a face he recognized. It was Maverick. And he wasn't just there as a spectator. He was standing with a man known to Lucas, someone he once trusted in the service, someone who'd left under strange circumstances. The photo raised questions that Lucas couldn't answer. Why had Maverick been there? And what connection did he have to someone inside the military? The more Lucas searched, the more he began to suspect this was no random act of violence. The attack on his mother may have been personal, yes, but it could also have been a warning, or worse, bait. The deleted footage, the missing informant, the threats, none of it felt accidental. Was someone trying to send a message? Was this part of something larger? Lucas didn't know yet, but his instincts screamed that whatever he was uncovering, it wasn't over. Not even close. And just when he thought things couldn't get more tangled, a new piece of information landed in his lap that flipped everything upside down. A voice message, left on Eleanor's phone from an unknown number, played only static at first until a distorted voice broke through. "You think you know the enemy. But the real traitor is closer than you think." That was all it said. No name, no clue, just a chilling hint that someone in Lucas's circle, someone close, might not be who they claim to be. And that's where we'll pick up next, because if Lucas can't trust his own allies, then the real danger might not be coming from the outside at all. What if the betrayal is already inside the walls? What if someone Lucas once trusted is playing both sides? Keep watching, because the next chapter is about to take this mystery into far darker territory. While Lucas was still reeling from the cryptic voice message that left more questions than answers, another thread of the mystery began to quietly unravel, this time through someone he hadn't spoken to in months. Her name was Sarah Jennings, an old friend from Lucas's past, a forensic analyst who had once worked with military intelligence before moving into the private sector. Their history was layered. More than just colleagues, they had shared something deeper, though life and deployment had eventually pulled them apart. Sarah had always been sharp, intuitive, and fiercely loyal, someone who could spot anomalies in data the way most people read a book. She hadn't heard from Lucas in over a year, so when she received a package on her doorstep marked "Private, for your eyes only," with no return address and no explanation, she was immediately on edge. Inside the plain manila envelope was a USB drive, unmarked, and a typed message that simply read, "If you care about him, stop him." Against her better judgment, Sarah plugged the drive into a secure offline machine. The contents were unlike anything she expected: grainy surveillance clips, redacted documents with Department of Defense letterheads, and satellite images that had been clearly pulled from restricted sources. But it wasn't just the data that unnerved her, it was the final video on the drive. Footage of Lucas, taken recently, surveillance-level footage. He was walking out of a cafe, unaware he was being watched, talking on the phone. The angle and clarity suggested more than just a passing observer. Someone had eyes on him, real-time eyes, and they wanted Sarah to know that. It was a direct message, an intimate form of manipulation that chilled her to her core. But it also confirmed something else. This wasn't just about a biker assaulting an elderly woman. Someone was orchestrating a bigger play, and they were keeping tabs on anyone who might try to uncover the truth. Sarah, alarmed but refusing to back off, called Lucas, and for the first time in a long time, their voices met over a line filled with tension and unspoken questions. She told him about the package, the message, and the video. Lucas, who had been following leads of his own, now had even more proof that whatever he was chasing had already turned around and started chasing him. The fact that Sarah, someone he hadn't even involved, had been dragged into it meant they were dealing with a network that extended far beyond Maverick and his biker gang. This wasn't just about revenge or street justice, it was surveillance, manipulation, and deep, layered control tactics. It reeked of black ops, or worse, rogue contractors with government connections. As Lucas and Sarah attempted to cross-reference the redacted files she received with Lucas's known intel, something strange emerged. One of the files listed a covert domestic training program that had been disbanded over a decade ago, Operation Hollow Trace. It was classified, erased from most official databases, and buried under layers of compartmentalized data. But Sarah remembered the name from her early years in the intelligence community. It had been a controversial program involving the use of former military personnel in civilian psychological testing scenarios. The program was shut down after rumors of mental conditioning and illegal surveillance surfaced. Lucas's name appeared nowhere in the file, but Maverick's did, along with two other names Lucas recognized from his former SEAL team. And suddenly, the lines began to blur. Was Maverick a pawn in something bigger? Had he been part of a failed program that left him mentally unstable, unable to distinguish friend from foe? Lucas couldn't ignore the coincidence anymore, especially after one more unexpected discovery. Eleanor's neighbor, the same one whose footage had mysteriously vanished, was now missing. No warning, no packing, not a word to anyone. Her mailbox overflowed with mail, her garden dried up in days, and no one saw her leave. One of the other neighbors mentioned a black SUV parked outside her home late the night before she disappeared, but the plates were government-issued, too clean, too perfect to trace. The sense of paranoia began to close in around everyone involved, and Lucas, once a man of rigid confidence and clarity, now found himself questioning everyone in his orbit. Even Sarah wasn't immune to doubt. As she scoured through the video files from the USB, she noticed an odd timestamp inconsistency in one of the clips, something she couldn't explain. When she ran a forensic check, the file's metadata showed it had been altered 2 days before she received it. That meant someone had intentionally tampered with the footage after recording it but before it was sent to her. And it begged the question, Was the message really meant to protect Lucas or to manipulate her into helping them control him? Just as Lucas was preparing to confront one of his former teammates, one of the two names from the Hollow Trace file, the teammate in question died in what the official report called a hunting accident out in Colorado. The details were vague, the timing too convenient. And for Lucas, it was one twist too many. Someone was systematically closing doors, erasing connections, and eliminating anyone who might link Maverick to something larger. And it was becoming clearer by the day that this wasn't just about protecting secrets, it was about rewriting them. But what happened next turned everything upside down. Late one night, Eleanor received another message, this time not on paper or voicemail, but as a live phone call. A voice, calm, steady, and unidentifiable, spoke to her gently, calling her by name and referencing something only she and her late husband would have known. "Your husband never died from the accident. He was silenced. And your son was never supposed to find out." The line went dead. And just like that, the mystery shifted again. The past Eleanor thought was buried was now re-emerging, pulling Lucas deeper into a story where even family truths were no longer certain. Someone, somewhere, had been watching this family for years. And the question that now loomed over everything was no longer just about Maverick, or the assault, or even revenge. It was this: what did Eleanor's family get caught up in years ago that someone is still willing to kill for today? The answers are coming, but they may destroy more than they reveal. The air had shifted, and Lucas felt it in his bones. It was subtle at first, just a nagging sense that something was off, the kind of instinct that had saved him more times than he could count during his missions overseas. But this time, it wasn't a war zone. It was his hometown, his childhood streets, his mother's neighborhood. Yet the threat felt just as real, maybe even more dangerous because it was hidden behind familiar faces, beneath the comforting surface of normalcy. What once felt like a mission with a clear objective had turned into a psychological maze where nothing was what it seemed, and no one could be fully trusted. It started one morning with a car. A silver Ford Taurus parked 2 houses down from Eleanor's front lawn. The windows were tinted, the license plate out of state. Lucas had never seen it before, and yet it seemed to be there every day now, sometimes for hours at a time. At first, he told himself it could be a visiting relative, a contractor, anything innocuous. But then he noticed the pattern. The car was always there when he arrived and always gone when he left. Once, he circled the block and came back unexpectedly. The car was still there, but the engine was running. And for a split second, he saw the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat, just sitting there, unmoving. It was the kind of thing that would mean nothing to most people. But Lucas had been trained to notice what others overlooked. That was surveillance behavior. It wasn't coincidence, it was control. Things escalated quickly from there. His phone, which he had always kept encrypted with military-grade software, started acting erratically. Calls dropped. Messages disappeared. His GPS rerouted itself to odd locations when he wasn't using it. He tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to software glitches or updates. But then Sarah called in a panic. She had tried to email him a data file, one containing a list of former Operation Holotrace operatives she'd managed to piece together from old archives. Not only did the file not send, but when she went to recheck it on her laptop, it was gone. Not just deleted, wiped, scrubbed, overwritten in a way only a skilled hacker could manage. And worse, her security system had logged a breach at 3:14 a.m. the night before. Someone had physically accessed her system. Sarah wasn't safe, and now neither was Lucas. That same evening, Lucas's world narrowed even further when he tried to reach another old teammate, Chris Duncan, someone he hadn't spoken to in over a year but trusted without question. They had survived some of the darkest moments of their military careers together, and Lucas always knew Chris would be straight with him. But when he called Chris's number, it rang once, then went straight to voicemail. No big deal, at first. But then it happened again. And again. Finally, Lucas sent a secure text message, a signal only Chris would understand, a phrase they used during recon missions when they needed to confirm their identity under duress. Hours passed. No response. Then, just before midnight, Lucas received a reply. One word, forgotten. It wasn't the correct code. In fact, it wasn't a code at all. And that's when Lucas knew either Chris was gone, or someone had taken over his phone. That word wasn't random. It was a message, and a terrifying one. The emotional weight of it all started to close in. For a man like Lucas, trained to compartmentalize, to suppress fear and focus on mission, this wasn't just stressful, it was suffocating. Every person he had once counted on was either missing, compromised, or silent. The safety of his mother, the only family he had left, now felt like a fragile illusion. Every sound at night seemed loaded with meaning. Every passerby, every delivery driver, every knock at the door sent his pulse racing. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and found himself scanning rooms reflexively, calculating exits, watching for reflections in windows. The paranoia wasn't paranoia anymore, it was realism. And yet, through the thick fog of rising fear, a deeper, more disturbing question began to claw its way to the surface of Lucas's mind. What if this hadn't started with Maverick? What if Maverick himself had been used from the very beginning, his violent act not just a crime of opportunity, but a trigger in a plan designed long before he ever crossed paths with Eleanor? What if the attack was a spark meant to draw Lucas out of hiding, to flush him from whatever protective shadows he had built around himself? Someone knew who he was. Someone wanted him in the open. And worse, someone might have been watching Eleanor for far longer than he'd realized. And then, the most chilling development yet. Eleanor disappeared. It happened without warning. Lucas had gone to pick up some files from Sarah and returned barely 90 minutes later. The door was unlocked, but nothing was stolen. Her favorite tea kettle was still warm. Her coat still hung on the hook by the door. But she was gone. No note, no text, no call. Just a silent, suffocating emptiness. Lucas tore through the house, checked every room, every cabinet, even the attic. Neighbors hadn't seen anything. The silver Taurus was gone too, as if it had never been there at all. But Lucas knew. It wasn't a coincidence. She had been taken. Or maybe, God forbid, she had gone willingly, coerced by something or someone Lucas hadn't accounted for. And just when it felt like the fear couldn't deepen any further, his phone vibrated. A new message. No sender. No text. Just a video. It was dark and grainy, but unmistakable. It showed Eleanor, sitting silently in what looked like an abandoned storage unit. Her expression wasn't scared, but calm, eerily calm, like someone who had either accepted her fate, or had been manipulated into believing she was safe. Lucas watched the video 3 times, looking for any clue, any sound, any light source he could use to track her. But there was nothing. No landmarks, no background noise, just her silent, motionless presence. And then, at the very end, as the screen faded to black, came a message typed across the screen: "You were never the hunter." In that moment, Lucas realized he wasn't just fighting a shadow war, he was inside a trap, one designed specifically for him, with stakes he could no longer predict. And as much as he wanted to charge forward, rescue his mother, and bring this to an end, the deeper fear now whispered a darker truth. Maybe this was never about Eleanor at all. Maybe it was always about him. The storm had reached a point where Lucas no longer felt like he was simply caught in the middle of something dangerous, he now understood he was the center of it. The message embedded in the video wasn't just a threat or a taunt, it was a psychological blow designed to push him toward the edge, and it was working. He hadn't slept in over 36 hours, his thoughts spinning in loops that never landed, his instincts firing at shadows, unsure which way to turn next. With Eleanor missing and every familiar face now clouded by suspicion, Lucas had only one option left: confront the people he once trusted most and demand answers, even if it meant tearing open old wounds that were never meant to be revisited. The first door he knocked on belonged to Marcus Trent, a former SEAL turned private security consultant who had once called Lucas his brother. They had served side by side in 2 of the most dangerous deployments of their careers, and Lucas had trusted Marcus with his life more times than he could count. But recently, Marcus had been distant, avoiding calls, ignoring texts, and giving vague excuses when pressed. Lucas had hoped it was nothing, just life moving them in different directions, but now he saw it for what it might truly be: a sign of guilt or fear. When Marcus opened the door and saw Lucas standing there, eyes bloodshot and jaw clenched, there was no surprise in his expression, only resignation, like he had been waiting for this moment to come. Lucas didn't waste time. He pushed inside and demanded answers, but Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to the back of the house, closed the blinds, and poured a drink. The silence dragged on like an exposed nerve until Marcus finally spoke. "I didn't want to be a part of this," he said, voice low and tense. But it was either play along or disappear like the others. He confessed that months earlier, he had been approached by a man claiming to represent a private agency with government backing, an off-book intelligence group with access to black sites and behavioral surveillance tech that hadn't officially existed since the early 2000s. They knew everything: Lucas's service record, his mother's routine, even details about Sarah that weren't in any official files. They had come to Marcus with a proposition: help keep an eye on Lucas under the guise of old friendship, or become a loose end. Lucas felt his stomach turn as Marcus handed over a flash drive. "This is everything I copied from their system before I cut and ran," he said, his hands trembling. "But I don't know what's real anymore. They fake data, edit timelines. They made it look like Maverick was acting alone, but I've seen logs suggesting he was being fed information about Eleanor, about you, even about your old CO." Lucas stood frozen, the weight of betrayal crashing over him in waves. This was someone who had once carried him through gunfire, now reduced to a frightened pawn in a game with rules no one could understand. Before Lucas could demand more answers, Marcus gave him one last warning, one that changed everything. "They're going to give you a choice," he said. "When they do, don't assume the obvious answer is the right one. They've already accounted for your instincts." That choice came sooner than expected. Just hours after Lucas left Marcus's house, another anonymous message arrived. No video this time, no voice. Just a live GPS pin and a single line of text: "Come alone, bring the drive, or your mother dies." The location was on the edge of town, near an abandoned industrial park that had been shuttered for over a decade. Lucas's heart pounded as he stared at the coordinates, rage and helplessness mixing into something raw and paralyzing. He couldn't involve the police, he already knew the system had been compromised. He couldn't call Sarah, he wouldn't risk her safety. He was truly alone now, and whoever was pulling the strings wanted him that way. But even as the walls closed in, Lucas had one more card to play, and it came with its own impossible cost. The flash drive Marcus gave him contained more than just surveillance logs. Deep within the encrypted files, Lucas found a decrypted video feed, footage of a facility he didn't recognize at first, filled with military personnel and unmarked black vehicles. And there, in the background, was Eleanor. Not chained or restrained, but standing, speaking calmly to someone just out of frame. She wasn't a prisoner. She was participating. At least, that's how it appeared. Lucas's mind raced with possibilities. Was she brainwashed? Threatened into cooperating? Or, even worse, had she known something all along and never told him? That one clip split Lucas's world into two unbearable paths. Either his mother had been used as bait to break him, or she had been part of the lie, maybe from the very beginning. The woman who raised him, protected him, supported him through every mission, might have been silently connected to the very force trying to dismantle him. The realization hit harder than any firefight he'd ever been in. Trust had always been his strongest weapon, and now it was shattered. His mission was no longer just about rescue or revenge. It was about finding the truth, whatever it was, no matter how much it hurt. The choice looming in front of him was brutal. Walk into the trap, hand over the drive, and risk handing them everything they wanted in exchange for a mother who might not even be a hostage, or hold the line, keep digging, and possibly lose the only family he had left. Every instinct screamed for action, but the deeper fear whispered a darker reality. Nothing he believed could be taken at face value anymore. Not even blood. And so, as the night crept in and Lucas prepared for the confrontation he knew was coming, a final message lit up on his phone. This time, it was from Sarah. "I think I know who's behind this. But if I'm right, you're not just being hunted. You're being studied." The world shifted again. Lucas looked out the window into the darkness, every shadow now a question, every moment another step into a past that refused to stay buried. And just like that, the choice wasn't between truth and safety anymore, it was between uncovering what he had spent his whole life trying to protect others from, or becoming the final experiment in someone else's design. Lucas had always known how to read a battlefield, how to pick apart chaos, find order in it, identify the players, calculate his next move. But now, as he stood in the center of a truth unraveling faster than he could contain, he realized this wasn't just a mission gone rogue or a personal vendetta, it was something far more orchestrated, more invasive, and terrifying in its scope. What had started as a brutal assault on his mother had become the fuse that lit up a conspiracy designed not just to dismantle him, but to test him, break him, study him. And he was far from the only subject. The drive Marcus had given him wasn't a random file dump. Sarah had been working through it non-stop, sleeping in short bursts and eating only what Lucas forced her to. What she found in its deeper levels shifted everything. Buried inside a triple-encrypted partition was a database, meticulously organized, with code names, dates, psychological profiles, and surveillance records dating back over 15 years. It wasn't just about Lucas. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, of files like his. Former military, special operations, intelligence officers, even civilian analysts who had no idea they'd been watched, catalogued, and in some cases, manipulated. Their behaviors were tracked during stress events, relationships documented and dissected, responses to trauma studied in granular detail. The kind of data a think tank would kill to get their hands on. The kind of program that wasn't just off the books, it was never meant to be found. But the real gut punch came when Lucas found one particular file, tagged under the alias Keystone. It was his. And it had been open and active for years. Someone had been documenting every move he made since his final deployment, including the decisions he made during high-stress field ops that he never reported. But it wasn't just about surveillance. The file contained recommendations, scenarios, controlled experiments, manipulations. They had been pulling strings, small ones at first, barely perceptible, testing his reactions to staged situations. That strange op in Kandahar where a source went missing. The faulty equipment shipment that nearly got his unit wiped in Fallujah. The seemingly random psychological review he was flagged for post-retirement. None of it had been coincidence. They were behavioral traps, constructs to observe how he handled betrayal, stress, grief. And Eleanor, his mother, was listed as a secondary asset. Not a target, not a liability, an embedded variable. He wanted to scream. He wanted to find the people behind it and burn the whole operation to the ground. But before he could even process it all, Sarah made a terrifying discovery. The name of the project wasn't Holotrace like they'd believed. That had just been the cover operation. The real program was something else entirely, Project Shepherd. And it wasn't about control. It was about prediction. The goal was to build psychological profiles so detailed that every future decision of high-value subjects could be forecasted, manipulated, even weaponized. And Lucas, with his elite combat record, unshakable moral compass, and history of surviving impossible situations, had become their crown jewel. They had been using him as a proof of concept for years, and now, they were about to bring it all to a horrifying conclusion. But before they could plan their next move, the betrayal hit. It came from the last person Lucas thought capable, Sarah. She had been acting strangely all day, distracted, jumpy, clutching her phone with white knuckles. Lucas chalked it up to stress until he found the hidden MIC clipped inside her sleeve. When he confronted her, the expression on her face wasn't guilt, it was pain. Pure, raw heartbreak. She hadn't planned on it going this far. At first, it was just a job. A quiet contract from a source within Homeland Security to monitor Lucas's activities under the guise of Reconnect Ion. She told herself it was surveillance for national security, not a trap. But when she realized what they were actually doing, how deep it went, she tried to back out. Only by then, it was too late. They had leverage. They always had leverage. Her brother had vanished 2 years earlier, and she was promised answers, if she played her part. Lucas couldn't even look at her. Every fiber in his body wanted to walk out, to leave her behind and push forward alone. But he knew better now. That's what they wanted. Isolation. Vulnerability. Predictable reactions. Sarah had betrayed him, yes, but she wasn't the enemy, she was another piece of the same machine, broken and used just like him. And the worst part was, the program had counted on this. Emotional fracture. Betrayal. Sacrifice. They weren't just documenting responses anymore, they were escalating them. The clock was ticking, and Lucas knew it. Moments later, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a live feed. Eleanor. She was sitting in what appeared to be a secure lab, her hands folded, calm as ever. A man in a lab coat stepped into frame and said only one thing: "You've passed every phase, Keystone. Now comes the final test. Save your mother, or expose the program. You get one. Choose." That was the moment everything fractured. The scale of it became undeniable. They didn't just want data. They wanted to turn morality into a decision tree. They were watching to see if a man trained to fight evil could be manipulated into sacrificing truth for love or love for justice. It was no longer about right or wrong. It was about predictability. About control. And now, Lucas had to make the one choice they thought they could forecast. But what if he chose neither? What if he stopped playing the game? And what if, for the first time, the experiment turned on the ones running it? The next move would define everything, but one thing was finally clear. The enemy wasn't just watching. They were expecting him to become one of them. And Lucas was about to prove how wrong they were. The cold wind whipped through the broken windows of the old industrial compound as Lucas stepped into the cavernous room where everything had been building toward. The location pinned in the final message had led him to this remote, long-abandoned research facility once used for experimental military training. The silence inside was unnatural, like sound itself had been sucked out by the years of secrets layered into the very walls. The concrete under his boots echoed as he advanced, his heartbeat pounding not just from adrenaline but from the weight of knowing that every step might be the last move he made freely. This was no longer about vengeance or even truth, it was about dismantling something so deeply embedded in the system that exposing it could bring everything down, including him. He found Eleanor in the center of the room, restrained not by ropes or chains, but by the gaze of the man standing behind her. The man wore a crisp, clinical suit that contrasted sharply with the grime of the setting, and his eyes were calm, dispassionate, observant, as if this was all just another dataset, another simulation to run. "Lucas," he said, his voice smooth and analytical. "You've exceeded our expectations." The words made Lucas recoil inside. It wasn't just condescension, it was confirmation. He wasn't a threat to them. He was a tool. A subject. A map of how the human mind reacts under impossible pressure. They hadn't just predicted his behavior, they had created it. The man introduced himself as Dr. Caldwell, the lead architect behind Project Shepherd. He spoke with the confidence of someone who knew that everything was already done, already logged, already processed. Lucas listened in silence as Caldwell walked him through the twisted logic of the program, how post-traumatic data was harvested from veterans, how behavioral profiles were cross-referenced with artificial stress simulations, how they had been able to forecast combat decisions with 94% accuracy by exposing candidates like Lucas to orchestrated trauma. Everything, from the biker assault to Sarah's reappearance, had been staged to push him to this breaking point. Even Maverick, the violent ex-con who seemed to be a wild card, had been part of the system. A failed subject from a prior phase, reinserted into the field to act out one final stimulus. Lucas was sickened. Every person in his life had either been manipulated, removed, or repurposed to serve this grotesque experiment. Sarah had been used through coercion. Marcus had been bought off. Chris Duncan had been erased when he refused to play. Eleanor, his mother, was a legacy variable, a person placed near him long before he ever realized it. She wasn't just a victim. She had been a part of something once, years ago, when her late husband had stumbled onto an early iteration of the program. When he refused to cooperate, they killed him. And Eleanor, left alone to raise a son they knew would one day serve, became part of the pipeline. She was monitored, not for her choices, but for how Lucas would react to her pain. Lucas tried to hold it together, but the truth was cutting deeper than any wound he'd ever endured. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking, the rage and betrayal finally boiling over. Caldwell's answer was chilling in its simplicity, because control is the new weapon. Predictability is the new power. And you, Lucas, are proof that we can turn even the most elite warriors into readable, repeatable patterns. If we can read you, we can read anyone. And if we can read them, we can control them before they ever pull a trigger. Lucas reached into his coat and pulled out the flash drive, the same one they had demanded from him. He held it up, letting the dim light reflect off its surface. "You want this?" he asked, his voice suddenly calm. "You think this gives you all the answers?" Caldwell nodded slowly, stepping forward, the smug certainty in his eyes undeniable. But Lucas wasn't finished. "Then you should know I uploaded everything on this to a Deadman's server this morning. If I don't cancel the transmission by midnight, it goes live, full dump, full exposure. Congress, whistleblower sites, classified intelligence circles. The kind of thing that can't be buried." The mood shifted. For the first time, Caldwell's expression flickered with concern. But before he could speak, Eleanor rose slowly from her chair, her restraints having never been locked. She walked to Lucas and placed a hand on his arm. "They thought they could break you," she said, her voice low but steady. "They never understood they built someone they couldn't control." Her words stunned Lucas, not because they were comforting, but because they confirmed what he feared most she had known. Maybe not the full scope, but enough. Enough to be part of it. And now, she was choosing him over them. That single moment collapsed everything Lucas thought he understood about love and betrayal. Then, gunfire rang out, sharp, chaotic, and close. A second team, faceless operatives in black tactical gear, had moved in from the shadows. Whether they were coming to kill Lucas or clean up the operation, he didn't wait to find out. He grabbed Eleanor and ran, ducking through rusted corridors as bullets shredded the walls around them. The fight was messy, desperate, and full of rage. Lucas neutralized 2 operatives with lethal precision, but this wasn't a mission he could survive with violence alone. He made it to the sub-basement where an old emergency generator still hummed. There, hidden behind sealed equipment, was the server he had rigged with Sarah's help, an independent signal booster wired to the drive. He reached for the cancel protocol, hesitated for a long, trembling second, and then pulled his hand back. The world needed to know. Even if it meant never seeing peace again. Even if it meant being hunted forever. He let the upload initiate. And just as he turned to leave, he saw Caldwell's reflection in a steel panel behind him. Calm. Watching. Smiling. "You did exactly what we hoped you'd do," he said. "Exposure doesn't end us. It feeds us. Now the world knows what's possible. And you," he paused, tilting his head like a scientist satisfied with his test subject, "you've become the blueprint." Then, as quickly as he appeared, Caldwell vanished into the shadows, disappearing in the chaos of alarms and smoke. The program would shift, evolve, maybe go deeper underground. But Lucas had lit the match. The story would spread. The world would know. But deep down, he now understood the game was never meant to end, it was meant to evolve. And just when he thought he'd seen the last twist, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was a video. Of Sarah. Sitting in a room. Smiling. And behind her stood Caldwell. Wearing a wedding ring. The same one her missing brother used to wear. The storm had passed, but nothing felt settled. The compound had gone dark after the upload, leaving behind only the wreckage of a life Lucas could never return to. In the days that followed, the world began to shift slowly, cautiously, as fragments of Project Shepherd surfaced across encrypted networks, insider forums, and whistleblower feeds. The files from the flash drive spread like wildfire through the right circles: images, names, timelines, documents too detailed to dismiss. News outlets were hesitant at first, dancing around the edges of what they couldn't prove outright, but the internet didn't wait. The words covert human behavior manipulation, military psychological testing, and SEAL operative experiment began trending on YouTube, Reddit, and every platform with a pulse on real-time curiosity. Lucas watched it all unfold from the shadows, staying one step ahead, because he knew better than anyone, truth didn't bring justice. It brought attention. And attention was dangerous. He didn't return to the home he once knew. Eleanor was placed under deep protective custody, but their relationship had changed irreversibly. She had chosen him in the end, but the years of silence, of complicity, even if done under threat, had left a fracture that couldn't be simply patched over. She tried to explain. She cried. She begged him to understand that she had made choices to survive, to protect him the only way she knew how. And Lucas wanted to forgive her. Some part of him even did. But the distance between love and truth had grown too wide, and the person he had become no longer fit in the life they once shared. So he left, not with anger, but with the quiet understanding that some wars don't end when the shooting stops. Some just change shape. Sarah disappeared shortly after the final message. Lucas traced her last known IP to a city across the border, but the trail went cold within hours. The video of her with Caldwell, smiling, poised, unbothered, played over and over in his mind. He no longer knew what was real. Had she been a victim, or had she been playing a role so deep she didn't know where it ended and where she began? Had the connection they rebuilt been part of the program or something that grew outside it, despite it? He wanted to believe that somewhere inside her was the woman who stood by his side when the world was unraveling. But belief wasn't enough anymore. The game they had been caught in didn't reward hope. It punished it. Still, there were victories, small but meaningful. A few of the operatives listed in the Project Shepherd logs had come forward anonymously, verifying the existence of underground testing and the manipulation of active and retired military personnel. A Senate inquiry was quietly launched, with more stonewalling than transparency, but it was a start. Lucas received word through encrypted backchannels that 2 key facilities had been dismantled. Caldwell had gone silent, vanished without a trace. No death record. No arrest. Just absence. That, more than anything, told Lucas the game was far from over. Programs like Shepherd didn't die, they evolved. They rebranded. They recruited new architects with cleaner hands and sharper strategies. He hadn't ended anything. He had only forced it to shed its skin. Lucas eventually settled in a coastal town under a new name. He worked on boats, took long walks on empty beaches, and trained in private, because he never knew when it might start again. Some nights, he couldn't sleep at all, haunted not by what he'd done but by what he now understood about the system he once served. The real war wasn't fought with guns or drones. It was waged in minds, in choices, in manipulation so subtle that most people never even knew it had started. He kept a small storage unit in town, its walls lined with files, maps, and backup drives, a new war room for a man who had become something between a fugitive and a witness. He didn't seek revenge anymore. He sought accountability. And if that meant watching from the shadows for the rest of his life, so be it. He had already lost too much to stop now. And yet, there was a moment, brief, fleeting, that stayed with him. One morning, while checking a burner phone he rarely used, a message appeared with no sender. Just a single line of text. "Are you ready for Phase 2? He stared at it for a long time, feeling the slow, hollow rise of adrenaline in his chest. No fear. Just certainty. The kind that comes when you realize the world doesn't need more heroes, it needs people who have nothing left to lose. He deleted the message, locked the phone in a lead case, and walked out into the sunlight. Somewhere out there, the next phase was already being written. And maybe, just maybe, they had underestimated the subject one final time. Because Lucas wasn't playing their game anymore. He was writing his own.